Al-Shabab fighters strike again, vowing to continue their battle against African Union troops in Somalia. Are foreign forces in the country a convenient pretext for militants to pose as nationalist champions? Has the military option failed in Somalia? And is it time to consider other options? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Days of intense fighting in Somalia after the Al-Shabab group declares an all-out war against invaders. On Tuesday, a second major attack in as many months, gunmen disguised as government soldiers stormed a hotel close to the presidential palace in Mogadishu. And again on Wednesday, another attack, this time on a packed marketplace. Zainab Walji has more.
On Monday, they declared war on the government and foreign forces in Somalia. And on Tuesday, Al-Shabab acted on this declaration with bloody intent. A suicide attack at the Hotel Munna in the capital Mogadishu left more than 30 dead, including several MPs and government officials. Despite the carnage, Al-Shabab's leaders remained unapologetic and vowed to continue their deadly campaign.
All those killed were members of parliament and collaborators for the aged government. We tell them be aware of facing the same fate.
The interim government remains defiant, calling the bombing a desperate and futile attempt to further destabilize the nation.
These groups thrive on blood and war. They have no strategy. They have not achieved anything in this supposedly professional operation.
But the attack on the Hotel Munna was not an isolated incident. On Wednesday morning, 5 people were killed and more than 24 injured when Al-Shabab fighters attacked the Bakara market in the capital. Meanwhile, hundreds of African Union soldiers from Uganda have arrived in Mogadishu to bolster government forces. Yet despite the many casualties and the fiery rhetoric, it is unclear whether this week's onslaught is the beginning of a concerted attempt to overthrow the government or merely another show of strength from Al-Shabab. What is evident, however, is the increasing reliance of the government on AMISOM, the African Union peacekeeping force in Somalia. And as Al-Shabab continues its attempt to drive a wedge between government forces and the people, their tactics must call into question the effectiveness of the multinational troops on the ground. Zainab Walji, Inside Story.
Joining us now to discuss this ongoing crisis are our guests. In London, Somali journalist Jamal Osman. In Oslo, Stig Hansen. He's an associate professor at the University of Life Science and author of the book Borders of Islam. And in Washington, D.C., Abdulakir Abdirahman. He's a director at Somalia Cause. That's an NGO promoting Somali peace and stability. Mr. Osman, I believe you were in the country when that attack in Mogadishu happened, not actually in Mogadishu, but there. What is your response and what was the fallout when it happened?
I think it is sad that Somalis are still suffering, but you have to remember that Somalis do die every day, but because the ministers and government officials have been killed, I think that is the reason we get lots of international attention. But I would say, as a Somali, it's something that I see every day or hear every day, so I wasn't that surprised. Mr.
Abdirahman, are you surprised and shocked at the extent of this? And do you think the only reason the world is expressing surprise is because government ministers were attacked?
I'm not actually surprised because the Shabab have done this before. This is not the first time they perpetrated this type of action. What the Shabab did yesterday is horrible, and we in Somali Coast, we condemn it in the strongest terms. This is not based on religious ground. This is not based on tradition and culture of Somalia. This is not based on any humanitarian ground by coming and murdering civilians and MPs who are sleeping on their beds in a month of Ramadan. This is so tragic, and we condemn it in strong terms. And I think they have indicated this in the past, and they said they will do it again.
What do you think it is based on then?
Well, they are claiming that this is based on Islamic religion, but if you talk to the majority of Somali scholars, Islamic scholars, both inside and outside the country, they agree this is not based on Islam. Where does it say in Islam that you can kill a fellow Muslim, someone who is fasting and sleeping on his bed? There's nowhere anywhere in Islam that indicates that. So I think they have a political motives. They have an ambition to take over the government and to take over Somalia, and they're hiding behind the religion. And that's why they're using this tactics of horrible of killing and murdering civilian people. And we condemn it in strongest terms.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Hansen? Do you think another war in the country has begun?
First, let me put it like this. I don't think this was unexpected, because if you look back in Shabab history, if something happens that they feel threatened by, they will usually do something. And this is the perfect way of communicating to the world. It's quite visible, and the press has catched up on it. I think this is to show Uganda and Burundi, to show muscles, to show that, okay, if you follow your rhetorics and come here, then you can see what you get. I don't think this is the start of a new intensive war. I think there will be a period in Mogadishu where the two sides are feeling each other out, you know, and Shabab is looking very keenly to AMISOM, and if the African Union rhetoric is going to be followed up on the ground. I think that's a big issue now.
What do you think their true capacity really is?
The Shabab will be not that numerically strong. Estimates would vary between 3,000 and 5,000. It's hard to say, but they will be surprisingly good in a Somali context when it comes to coordination, command and control. So they are good at coordination and they are good at planning. And that's why they are quite formidable in the Somali context.
Mr. Osman, Mr. Hansen was saying that they don't have too many supporters, but they are able to conduct these audacious attacks, also cross over into Uganda and conduct an attack there. Who do you think is supporting them, both financially and from a military point of view?
I think when people say Al-Shabab fighters do not have supporters of the Somali people, I would argue with that. You might say, yes, a lot of Somalis do not support Al-Shabab, but those Somalis who are in southern Somalia, especially where Al-Shabaab fighters control, I do think they have a lot of supporters. And in terms of the financial and where they get their money from, I'm not entirely sure, but they do get from locals, they do get from their sympathizers and so on.
Yeah, I mean, who do you think benefits from this type of action?
I think there are lots of actors who are benefiting from this conflict. One obvious one would be Ethiopia, our arch enemy, and the other actors would be some of the international community, in particular, I think, the US. And you have to remember that I remember talking to one of government officials back in back in March, when Sheikh Sharif came to London. And I said to him, why don't you want to talk to Al-Shabaab? And he said, it's not up to us. He said, we are relying on the international community, in particular the US, and we just have to listen what they tell us. And obviously there is a conflict of interest. The US would have their own interest about Somalia, but the Somalis would have other interests, and people, and they would have different priorities. So I think there are lots of people who are benefiting from it, whether they are Somalis or non-Somalis.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Hansen?
No, I don't really agree with that. I think there's also a lack of benefits for the international community. I think there's a lot of confused actors here, and I want to highlight the total lack of organization of the support effort to the transitional government, where you had a police force who doesn't get adequate pay over time. And I would though stress that I agree with the previous speaker when it comes to local support, because the fact is that the police forces and the security functions of the TFG, the transitional government, haven't been there for ordinary people. If you look at Shabab propaganda, what they stress is that they provide some kind of local justice, and the transitional government has been very poor on that issue.
I mean, it is quite incredible, isn't it, if you look at the support that the international community can give for their ships, their boats that pass through Somali waters. You've got a fleet out there supporting this, preventing it from happening, but very little support on the ground, emotionally and financially.
I think the most incredible thing here is the amount of rhetorics that has been put into this training of governmental soldiers, and then you have this very common story now, and it's been taking place over 3 years. Basically, foreign powers training transitional government forces, then they go back into Mogadishu and they're not paid, and they just dissolve or fight amongst themselves. And this has been going on for 3 years, which is kind of very ironic.
Mr. Abdirahman, you must really wonder who cares about your country and who cares both locally and internationally about its success.
The Somali people care about their country, both inside and outside the country. The United States government condemned yesterday's attack where the President Obama was vacationing in Massachusetts.
Yeah, but that's not enough, is it?
And the State Department, that's not enough. But what we are saying is that there is a policy of containment. Let's keep Somalia, let's keep the problem of Somalia inside Somalia. And that's not working. We know that if Al-Shabab are not confronted, they went to Uganda and caused all kind of havoc and destruction in the bombing that took place a couple of months ago. And we also know that they have said time and again they want to do this type of action wherever it's possible. And Somali Americans, especially in the United States, have also had a problem where we were able, the Shabab were able to recruit some young Somali Americans to go to Somalia and fight. But the problem we have to face is that we cannot only focus on counterterrorism. The focus of Somalia should be multifaceted. We have international community who always talk and say whatever they have to say in order supporting the government, but they're not coming through with their pledges and their support. We have a government that was elected in 2 years who are not functioning and doing what they were supposed to do. They have not articulated a national agenda to Somali people. They have not come forward and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to bring peace and stability in Somalia. We have had a president who has been traveling so extensively, and members of parliament and ministries are always overseas. No one is protecting and functioning as a government in Somalia. So we have to address, we need a different vision, we need a different approach, we need a government that's effective, who can protect its people, its citizens, and we have an international community who should not only talk and issue statements of condemnation, but they have to be engaged.
Sorry to interrupt you, Abdul Qadir. You say the government is working for Somalis, but this is what I was saying earlier. They are not working for the Somalis. Some of those ministers who are trying to help the Somalis are being told not to do these things, and they have to listen to the international community. They are not using their own mind or experience to decide what's best for Somalia, and I think that is where the problem lies.
Okay, let's put these latest attacks into perspective. Somalia has not had an effective central government for almost 2 decades, and as you were hearing from our guests there, the government that's in place now isn't doing a very good job. Power struggle between opposing clans and warlords resulted in years of lawlessness and instability. In 2004, the main warlords and politicians signed a deal to set up a transitional government in exile which had little authority. Its power was further compromised with the rise of the Islamists who took over much of southern Somalia, including the capital, in 2006. With the support of Ethiopian troops, forces loyal to the interim government seized control back from the Islamists by the end of 2006. But that was short-lived. The Islamists regained much of their hold over the south by late 2008. Ethiopia pulled its troops out in January 2009, and as Somalia's military position weakened further, the Islamists, mainly the Al-Shabab, appear to have consolidated their position. Let me put this to you, Mr. Hansen. Under the Islamic courts, which eventually split to form Al-Shabab, there was a period of relative peace in the country. Does that suggest that they could do it again?
Yes, I had the fortune of visiting Mogadishu during the courts, and it was like a form of springtime in Europe. You can see people walk outside. I think for the time being, as the transitional government is today, that actually the Shabab at the local level can be much better at upholding law and order than the transitional government, because the transitional government police forces are in such a shamble. But I also think that we get a much harsher form of justice which you know could be in the long run not so very popular, and even in the short run it will create some hostility amongst the Somalis. You can see the policies towards the you know, football matches on TV and etc., etc. So you will have this local justice, but you will have a harsh form of justice, and this form of justice will basically violate a lot of human rights.
Mr. Abdurrahman, do you think, say, a decade on of Al-Shabaab being in power, if that indeed is the case, that you will see the next generation being a Taliban-style generation?
I believe that if Al-Shabaab were able to take over Somalia, they will cause problems and they will cause havoc. They will not bring peace, but they may bring peace with intimidation and fear. What we need to focus on is that how can we win the minds and hearts of Somali people? That's where the government is failing. They have not articulated their policy of how to win the hearts and minds of people. So the status quo is not acceptable. So the fighting seems to be continuing. We have advocated a Somali cause organization to bring Muslim country forces. Why are we also insisting the same status quo and bringing an increasing international force? Why don't we listen to the people of Somalia or just appeal the sensitivity of Somalia by bringing Muslim countries? We really were very excited when we heard that Guinea, as a Muslim country, were going to Somalia. We need to recruit governments such as Egypt, such as Muslim countries to go to Somalia. And the problem we need to warn is that Ethiopia has been on the next door. Mr. Mullah Zenawi was saying that we are here to protect the AMISOM forces. If we are called, we are ready to go and intervene. And I think that is a way of telling us that the Ethiopians are coming. And we really want to warn to the Somali people and also to the international community that will have an adverse effect if we bring Ethiopia into Somalia. We need to reform
that's the
this
problem,
government.
isn't it? Here,
that's not working.
That is one of the problems here, Mr. Osman, is the presence of foreign forces. Al-Shabaab says that this justifies their fighting. It makes them heroes to some in the country. I mean, if you pulled out international forces, foreign forces, wouldn't it take Al-Shabaab's reason, its recruiting tool, away from them?
Yeah, I think it would. And the more international, the more foreign forces come into Somalia, the more support Al-Shabaab will have. And if you remember when the Uganda incident happened, Al-Shabaab released a statement in which they said that we are here to protect you. We did this because of what the Ugandan forces are doing to you. And in that sense, they will win a lot of support. And I think people talk about foreign forces and bringing them, but I'm not sure if that will help. And I would argue slightly with a fellow guest by saying Al-Shabaab, though they have a strict Sharia law, I think they are improving. If you look at about a year ago, the way they were dealing with the Somali people.
Yeah,
and
they're
now,
dealing with the Somali people by conducting these audacious attacks that are killing hundreds of innocent Somali people. That's not a very good message.
But they are targeting government forces or government officials. I'm talking about the way they are dealing with the Somali public, the areas that they control.
Well, this is exactly the way they're dealing with the Somali public.
I really disagree.
They are improving. They are improving, and they are learning from their mistakes.
They are improving what? By killing innocent civilians? Yeah. They have done it. They have done it in Beledweyne. They have done it by killing ministries and students who are graduating. They have killed and caused so many havoc and destruction. I don't think they're improving. They're improving by learning more tactics how to kill more people. That's not the solution. The solution is let's reform this government, let's fix the government, let's move forward and support the Somali police force, Somali military force. Let's pay them salaries. We train them overseas, we bring them in, and we leave them there. So what they do, they join the Shabab. So we need to really change the approach and the vision we used before and come up with a new vision of supporting Somali people.
Let Mr. Hansen say something, please.
Yes, I would like to say that, you know, we have to put Al-Shabab in perspective. If you compare it with the transitional government's police forces who are not paid and robs quite frequently, if you compare it with the previous warlords, you know, they are bringing some kind of local justice. I personally don't like that form of justice at all. And I also want to warn about another thing. I don't think Al-Shabab will collapse if international forces pull out. I agree with the previous speaker. I don't think it will help much if you put in more international forces either. But Al-Shabab, no, they also have an international agenda. They've shown that quite clearly. And the third point I want to make is, in all this gloominess talking about Somalia, I want to also stress that there are positive examples. You know, the Puntland government is actually, although not dealing that good with piracy, it's bringing something to its own people, and Somaliland is actually doing quite well. And I think we should keep those entities in mind also when we talk about
But
Somalia.
How does this part of Somalia get to like Puntland, get to the equivalent of Somaliland? What needs to be done to push it in that direction?
I think listening to the other speakers, you know, that they make a very, very good point, and that is, for the time being, the transitional government, they don't have that much, there's not much local ownership in it. You know, if you go to Mogadishu, people will say, oh, who are these people? They're flying around the world, and maybe they are doing that because of fundraising, but locally, it's not seen as they are doing much, and certainly there has to be some change in this aspect.
And Mr. Osman, surely if Somalia continues to be a failed state, if the government continues to fight for anybody but the Somalis themselves, do you think there will be some sort of fallout along the Islamic coast of Africa?
Yeah, I'm sure it would spread to other parts, and we have seen that in the recent case in Uganda, and probably in few other cases in Kenya. But I think the best way forward would be to work with Al-Shabaab. Sadly, it's not going to happen, and I know that, but the best way would be to work with Al-Shabaab and to recognize.
I mean, could you not bring them into some sort of peace process? I know that their condition is for African Union troops to leave, but are there no moderates within Al-Shabaab that could be drawn in?
Yeah, there are, and people say Al-Shabaab have international agendas. Few of them might, but majority of them are Somalis. You have to remember that. And the majority of them want the best for Somalis. And again, if you look at the areas that they control, I'm not talking about the Mogadishu. I'm talking about Kismaayo, Baydhabo, other parts of southern Somalia. They do bring security and stability, and the locals love them, and they are much better and much more effective in that sense than the TFG, which is controlling pockets of Mogadishu. So I think it's not going to happen realistically, but the best way forward would be to recognize Al-Shabaab and work with them.
Mr. Abdirahman, what do you expect to happen? Sure, jump in very quickly if you will.
Yes, I can jump in very quickly. You know, I think my fellow commentator here is highlighting the justice function of Al-Shabab very well. But I also think that Al-Shabab did astonishingly anti-Somali things. They removed the Somali flag. They didn't want to have the Somali flag because it was a secular symbol. They attacked the SYL, you know, some of the early nationalists, rhetorically. So they manifested that there's something else going on there. And also we should remember that it's a small organization, and there's the percentage of foreign fighter is probably quite large compared with the total size of the organization.
Certainly a subject that I wish we could talk for a lot longer than just half an hour. But thank you very much to our guests in London, Jamal Osman, in Oslo, Stig Hansen, and in Washington, D.C., Abdul Qadir Abdirahman. And thank you, as always, so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.